this is as near to heavenly ambrosia as you can get, this glorious melange, this pinky mousse, this strawberry souffle for dessert. Today on The French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Well, the other day we were at a very fancy and expensive restaurant for dinner. And they had the most beautiful strawberry souffle for dessert. And I said, gosh, that's such a good idea. And it was so good, I tried one the next day out on my husband. And it turned out so well that I thought, this is a splendid idea, and I should add it to all of our repertoire. So that's what we're doing today, is strawberry souffle. And this was a terribly expensive restaurant, but I find that the souffle isn't madly expensive, and I think you'll find that it works out very nicely, and you don't need to find that a souffle is going to scare you to death, which I think it does a lot of people, because you have the problem of when to put it in and when to take it out and what you can do ahead. But what I want to be able to show you today in the souffle is that you can arrange it so that it'll fit into your menu. And what I have here is 4 egg whites, because souffles always have to have egg whites, and that is one of the hideous problems. I mean, it doesn't need to be a problem when you know how to do it. Of the souffle, I want to show you all about the egg whites, but before I begin on that, we will have to have some preliminary discussions of what souffles go into and the various types of souffles. And the first thing that you have to do when you're doing a souffle is to heat the oven, and we got the oven there heating, and in this case it's to be at 425 degrees. And then the second thing you have to do is to prepare the souffle dish to receive the souffle. And I have a selection of dishes here for you to look at. This is the one that I like really the best of all. This is the French Charlotte mold. And I looked it up somewhere, I think it was Queen Charlotte of England, who had the first dish baked in a mold like this, so it was called a Charlotte. And when you're looking for these, you usually can get them in French import houses. Be sure that you get one that's made out of tinned metal. And this is called tole, T-O-L-E, étamé. Étamé means tinned. And it's rather heavy. And it's not, sometimes you see a Charlotte mold that looks as though it were made out of a rather thin aluminum or tin. And don't buy that kind, because it is not all-purpose. This one you can bake in it, and you can mold cold aspics in it, and it has a nice little ear so that when you turn it upside down to unmold, you can lift it up by the ears. And it's just a great all-purpose dish. And you have other ones, American ones. This American ceramic is oven-proof and fireproof and works extremely well. It's always white, which is something of a nuisance. This is another one out of oven-proof glass, which is called a mixing bowl. But it has a nice up and down shape, which I like very much for souffles. It's not designed very well, in that if you want to unmold things, you have to stick a knife to get under it. It doesn't have the little ears that the French Charlotte has. But it's a very nice all-purpose kind of a baking dish. And then we also have the typical French souffle dish with these little flutings up and down. And this is a nice all-purpose dish for baking and for custards as well as for souffles. But if you're going to use it for a souffle, you have to put a collar around it because it's too low. But I'm going to use my Charlotte. And this is a 4-cup Charlotte mold. I mean an 8-cup Charlotte mold. And I'm going to prepare it for the souffle, which means to butter the inside of it. And this one has about the You see this one, it's about the same size, and if you add a collar to this, you would have about the same kind of a souffle on the regular French dish, the same kind of a height. Now that's buttered, and then you want to put some sugar in it, and then turn the sugar all around to coat the inside of the dish. And then tap out any excess sugar. I'm tapping it not on the floor, but in a wastebasket. And then you're also going to have to make a collar for this one, because you never quite know how high the souffle is going to rise. And say if the souffle is going to rise that high, it rises before it's really already set, so that if you don't have a collar to hold it in, it can spill over all over the oven, and then it just spills out of the dish and is an awful mess all the way around. So you could make a collar out of heavy paper or brown paper or aluminum foil. I'm just going to use plain wax paper, fold it in half, and then buttered on one side. The buttering is to keep the souffle from sticking, and also it helps you put it onto the mold. And I've got to make little ear holes here, so I'll make, there's one ear hole. And then coming around, here's another one. And then I'm going to pin it. I always find that I seem to use an awful lot of pins for things. It probably doesn't need a pin in the bottom, but I'll put one in anyway. And this you can prepare naturally, way ahead of time. And if it's a hot summer day, maybe you should put it in the refrigerator so that the butter won't melt. And then the souffle will presumably rise up about that high, but if it rises even higher, it won't hurt anything. I'll get some of these molds out of the way. And we're going to do, this is going to be a fruit souffle, a strawberry one. And these are frozen strawberries, but you can use, now I wanted another bowl over here to put these in. You can use raspberries or canned apricots, which is very good. And I'm pureeing these through a food mill using the medium blade. I found that if you puree it through too fine a blade, then you don't have it doesn't look enough like strawberries, because I like to have a little bit of strawberry seed left into it. I've used 2 1-pound packages of frozen strawberries. And if you use fresh strawberries, 1 quart would give you about the 2 cups of puree about 1 3/4 to 2 cups of puree. Now, let's see how much we've got in there. I can't see that without my glasses. No. Well, that's just about 2 cups of puree. And of course, this is already sweetened. But if you're using fresh strawberries, you would add about ½ cup of sugar either now or later. And I'll show you the method of how you would add it later. And you still have your strawberry juice, which you can use to make a sauce out of, or a Bavarian cream or something else. But I'm going to use it for a sauce, and you'll see it again later on. Now, cleaning up the deck so that we can get going to the rest of it. And of course, this you can do somewhat ahead of time. Now we have the whole idea of a souffle, which does scare people every now and then, and I think it's mainly because you're dealing with egg whites. And it is only really a question of mastering the egg whites, and once you master the egg whites, which is not a very difficult thing, I don't think you're going to have any trouble with the souffle because egg whites automatically make it rise. And in France, you always see this unlined copper bowl, and this has little hammer marks on it if it's the right kind of a thing. And you're supposed to have a great big beater like that. And very often in this country, they'll sell you a little beater like this, which is not good because it takes too long to beat. What you want is the biggest beater that will fit into the smallest bowl, like this. And you can see if you have a little beater, you're not going to, it'll work, but it takes a long time. With a great big beater, you can beat them in about 2 minutes. And it works extremely well, and one reason that it works awfully well is because you put salt, and the salt and the egg whites and the copper create an acid condition which keeps the egg whites up. And I think that's the reason that it works so well. And they're marvelous, but they're very expensive, and I think that if you feel you have to beat egg whites in one of these bowls, you'll get terribly discouraged because it's so expensive and it's a lot of trouble and everything like that. So I'm going to show you other systems which I think work very well too. And I think the hand beater is one of the very best ways to do it. And I have in here 4 egg whites, and I'm going to start beating them up rather slowly at first. Just outside, you want to break them up first, and you want to be sure that you have them at room temperature. Because if you don't have your egg whites at room temperature, they begin to fleck and coagulate, and they're not going to rise as much as they should. And then after they have foamed to this extent, for 4 egg whites, you want to add a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And this cream of tartar acts like gives that acid condition that the salt in the copper bowl does. Because cream of tartar is tartaric acid. And the reason that acid seems to help egg whites, I don't know why, but it does, is that it gives them a body and a stability, so once that you've beaten them up, they'll stay beaten. And also something good to add is a little tiny pinch of salt, even if it's going to be in a strawberry souffle, because it gives them a little more taste. You see how nicely that works. And I like the idea of being able to hold the bowl in your hand and circulate the beater around. You could also use a handheld beater in a copper bowl, and it would work very well. Now, we want to see how these are. They're supposed to stand in little peaks. Now, it isn't quite ready yet, but you can see it almost is. So it just needs a little tiny bit more beating. I really think the handheld beater in a small bowl works better than a machine beater. And it works just as fast. I mean, I think both either with the copper bowl and the big beater, or with this, or with the great big wonderful heavy-duty beater, it always takes just about 2.5 minutes. And these are done, and now look how they are. You see how they hold themselves up, and they're lovely and they're velvety. And whenever you see that it's supposed to be beaten egg whites, this is exactly the way they're supposed to be. Another trick is you can turn the bowl upside down, and the egg whites stay. But they're never to be beaten any more than this and never any less, so that there aren't 2 or 3 or 4 ways that egg whites should be. They should be just exactly like this. Hold their peaks and be lovely and silky and beautiful to look at. And now we have to get to the souffle proper. And this is a rather special type of souffle, this one that I'm going to do. But there are 2 types. There's one type that is a custard or a bechamel sauce, and then there's another into which egg whites are folded. And then there's the other type for the fruit souffles, in which you make egg whites and then fold the fruit into it. And this is what I think is very good, and but this is a special one, and that is called an Italian meringue. And I have one half cup of sugar and 3 tablespoons of water. And we have to make a sugar syrup, and the hot sugar syrup gets beaten into the egg whites. And this is called an Italian meringue. And we've done a great deal of sugar syrups before, and as you know, it's very simple to do. The only thing you have to be sure that you do is that you let the is that you completely dissolve the sugar before you let it come to the boil. I have a feeling I put that on a little too fast, but this is going to be all right. So be sure that you take the pan and swish it around by its handle until the syrup has begun to boil, and then the syrup has cleared. If you don't do this, and I have run into that trouble myself a number of times by trying to do things too fast, you're going to have little sugar crystals that form, and then the whole sugar turns, and then the syrup turns back into sugar crystals rather than into syrup. Now I put the cover on here because that's a good idea, and I've got the heat on very high, and in about a minute or so it'll be boiling down. The bubbles will be nice and thick, and we want to boil it to the soft ball or stage, which is about 238 on the candy thermometer. In France, in French recipes, if you run into them, you'll often see that they say to use crushed sugar lumps. And the reason they say that is that very often their regular sugar is made out of sugar beets. And if you boil up sugar beets sugar, sometimes you can get into trouble. But sugar lump sugar is pure cane sugar. Luckily, in this country, you don't have to worry about that, because all of our sugar says pure cane sugar, and it hasn't been adulterated with whatever they adulterate sugar with. Now for this was using frozen strawberries, which are already sweet, so I used half a cup of sugar. If you're going to use fresh strawberries, use a whole cup of sugar and 1/3 of a cup of water, because they need extra sugar. Now I'm watching that like a hawk, and what you can tell when you're doing sugar, when the bubbles begin to thicken quite a bit, you're getting to that stage known as the soft ball. You see that's getting quite thick, and the bubbles are getting thick. I think get used to boiling sugar and making caramels, because if you're scared of doing this kind of thing, you're going to limit yourself a great deal. There, I'm not even going to test it because I can see that that's right. It's a nice thick syrup, and so that is now ready to go into the egg whites. What did I do with my beater? Oh yes, I put it under here. Now at a medium speed, you just begin beating this hot syrup into the egg whites. Another reason some people don't like to make sugar syrup is because they find that the pan is too hard to clean. But what you do after you've made your syrup, you just fill the pan with water and boil it. And the boiling water will clean off the pan. Then you want to beat this until it feels fairly cool. I'm going to see how that is. Now this is, and that again looks very nice. I'm going to beat it just about a little tiny bit more to thicken her up. There, look at that. That's a beautiful consistency, and it holds its shape beautifully. You know, you can use this kind of a meringue for cooked meringues in the oven. It cooks much quicker than the regular meringue mixture, and you can also use it as a base for ice cream and many other things. So it's a very useful type of mixture to know about. Remember, that's called the meringue italienne, or Italian meringue. Now, I almost forgot that we have to have I want to have some cornstarch in this. You can make these soufflés without any starch at all, but I think it has too meringue a taste, so I always like to put a little bit of cornstarch. I'm going to put in 1 1/3 tablespoons and then beat it in again. I just find that the soufflé with the starch in it has a tenderer and nicer texture. It's just as well. I don't like a chocolate soufflé without a little bit of starch or flour in it either. To me is a little bit too meringue, if you know what I mean. I like that sort of a tender, what the French call a moelleux. Now if you're going to do this ahead, you can go this far ahead a good half hour or so, and if you find that the egg whites seem to have gone down a little bit, you can rebeat them. Just say if you're going to do it more than an hour ahead, you could even add an extra egg white. Rather than using 4 egg whites, you could use 5 and then beat it ahead. I don't think I would, however, fold in the strawberries until the last minute. As you'll see from folding the strawberries, it's very easy to do. So here's our 1 3/4 to 2 cups of strawberry puree. And now this is your next element, which is terribly important in making a soufflé, is that you must fold it properly. And this means taking your rubber spatula and go plunk down into the middle and then turn your spatula around to the side of the bowl, and you're gradually bringing a little bit of the strawberry up over the egg whites. I'll do that movement again, because this is the crux, is go down to the side and around like this. I don't think once you get the idea of how to beat egg whites and how to fold things in, you're never going to have any trouble with cakes or with soufflés. Because the thing is, if you don't fold them in properly, you're going to deflate the egg whites. And as you notice, you keep turning the bowl around, and then getting around to the side and then underneath a little bit. But that is now really properly folded in. And you don't want to overfold. Say if you were doing something like a chocolate soufflé in which the chocolate had hardened to some extent, you would have a very difficult time folding in the egg whites, because the mixture was so stiff that by trying to fold, you would deflate the egg whites. In that case, you have to control yourself, soften it up either by heating a little bit or by beating in a little bit of milk, or else by frankly stirring in some of the egg whites to lighten the mixture, so that then when you begin to fold, you have the consistency like a thick whipped cream or thick mayonnaise, and then you can always fold things in properly. I was trying to think what else I should tell you about soufflés. Well, I think this is a particularly nice one for fruit, because it is so simple to do, as you can see it. I think if you had to use this copper bowl and the wire and the hand whip the way they used to years ago, you'd probably think 2 or 3 times about making a soufflé. But when you can do it with a machine and a perfectly simple, really inexpensive kind of a hand beater like this one, there's no problem at all. And now the soufflé goes into the prepared mold, and there she just goes in. It's just lovely looking, isn't it? And the mold should be filled by about, probably, that's about 3/4. And then it is ready to bake. You wouldn't have to bake it immediately, but it's safer to. Then this goes into your preheated 300, 425 degree oven, which you then reduce immediately to 375, and it bakes for just about exactly 35 minutes. Now, I'm going to rush over and get my glasses, and I'll be right back. You want to test it to make sure it's done. And take a big skewer and stick it right down into the puff. And the skewer comes out perfectly clean, and it's done. It's also risen, and it's browned slightly. And then take off your collar. There you are. That one didn't rise as high as some of them do. Sometimes it'll rise up that high, and then they usually sink down a little bit as they cool. But with this kind of a souffle, it never sinks down as much as it does with the other kind of a souffle that's done with a cream sauce. Now, how to serve the souffle, which is very important. Because when you serve it, you don't want it to collapse. So you take your spoon and fork back to back, and you go plunk and separate it. I think this can often happen. You make a souffle, and then somebody who's serving it serves it the wrong way, and the whole thing collapses immediately. Now here's a little bit of sauce, and I'm following what the restaurant did. They used a little bit of a raspberry sauce with the strawberry souffle, which I thought was rather clever. So there you are. And with it, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a little bit of champagne, because I don't think it's often that one has such a beautiful dessert. And really, what a beautiful way it is to end a meal. It's a poem. It's a feast for the eyes, and to the taste, it's certainly one of the world's most successful marriages. This union of the egg white and the strawberry. And that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit!
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.